Hello and welcome to the Toolkit for Traders YouTube channel where we give you the tools for trading success. And we're on to the fifth installment of the MQL5 programming tutorial. So let's get started. So today we're going to start to do some clever stuff with our code and we're looking at logic. So let's get into that. We'll be doing a recap on functions, which we covered in the last episode. We'll be looking at if-else logic statements and how to get your EA to make decisions. And we'll then continue on from our coding of the previous example expert advisor, and we'll make it a little bit more useful. So the quote for this lesson is from Albert Einstein. Logic will get you from A to B. Imagination will take you everywhere. So we're going to do the fundamentals, the building blocks of logic here, but really it's up to you, your creative mind, to use the tools that MetaTrader has for you to make a useful and profitable, potentially, expert advisor. So we'll just do a quick recap on functions then, so we cover and remember what we did last time. So functions are reusable pieces of code that can take input parameters, complete a process, and then return an output, a bit like a factory. To create a function, you declare the output variable type, you name your function, and you declare the type and name your input variables as well, or they're also called, your input variables are also called parameters. And the code is written between the curly brackets. The output is sent back using the keyword return. And some functions have no outputs and use the keyword void when you declare that. Some functions have no inputs and just complete a process as well. Just a reminder, if you like this video, you like the content we're doing here, please like and subscribe and put me a comment, even if that comment is something you don't understand, you want an answer to, or just that you like the video. I really, really appreciate that. And I do read through all the comments. So thank you for that. So if-else statements, we've got a picture here of a fork in the road and it's a decision point. Do we go left or right? And with our if-else statements, we're using these to get our expert advisor to go one direction or another. If-else statements are one of the most commonly used logic operators in coding. There are others, but this is the one you'll probably use the most. So this is the one we'll cover in the most detail today. If-else statements, we ask a true or false question. So with an if and an else statement, generally you're asking a true or false statement. You can ask if something's greater than or less than. But to start off with, we're looking at if the answer is true, we do a code in one section. And if the answer is false, we do the code in the other. So let's just look at that a minute. So an example that we might have in our code is we might have an if statement here. We say if, we open the curly brackets to put our question. So just like if you were writing a question in Spanish, let's say, you'd start with an upside down question mark and you'd end with a question mark at the end, and that encapsulates your question. In coding, you use curly brackets there and there, and we ask it a question. So we say if the price, which we might have defined before, is greater than the value of the simple moving average, then we can evaluate whether this whole statement is true or false. So even though this is more than or less than, or we might have different ways of asking this question, ultimately what we're trying to understand is this statement true? If the price is above the SMA, then it'll be true. If it's less than, it'll be false. So if the answer is true, then we have curly brackets, same as we did with the functions. We have curly brackets to, again, encapsulate the script we want to run if the statement is true. This part here is called the expression. If the expression is true, we might have some code here, which I've put a comment in here, a placeholder to say open a buy order. So we put our code that we want to run in the case that this is true in between the curly brackets. We can then place an else statement directly after the curly brackets and open up some new curly brackets. So what we have here is we have if this expression is true, we can open a buy order, else, so that what happens in the opposite? What happens when it's false? Well, we run the script in this section here. Now, you don't have to have an else, but you can have an else if you want to go one way if it's true and go one and the other way if it's false. But equally, sometimes you may only want to do something if it's true, in which case you can leave the else statement out. So then we can write our code between the curly brackets. So we can say we want to close any buy orders currently open. So here's a statement: if price goes above the SMA, we're going to open a buy order, and if it goes back below the SMA, so that statement there will be false. We want to close the any buy orders that we currently have open. So logic operators are useful. They're part of the expression, the question that we ask the code to evaluate, and that will help us to get to a true or false answer. We can use, excuse me, we can use a double equal sign, seen here, to check if the two variables are exactly the same. And if they are exactly the same, it will evaluate as true. So it's important to note that they must be exact. So if you're using doubles in particular, doubles have many, many numbers after the decimal place and will quite often evaluate as false because they're not exactly the same. So that's one thing to be careful with double equals, because you will sometimes, it will always be false, even though you think it should be true. So they're good for integers and strings and booleans, bad for doubles because it's hard to be exactly the same. The other thing to note is that we're using two equal signs rather than just the one. If you use one equal sign, that's equivalent to when we create variables, when we set a variable to equal another. So you'll get some funny things happening in your code if you just use a one equal sign within your expression. So an example here, we've got an if statement: if value 1 is equal to value 2, and the expression will be true, and it will run the script within the curly brackets. Just a note again, with the one equal statement here, the two equals here, this is correct. If you do this, what will happen is value 1 will be set to value 2. So value 1 will become value 2, and then you'll have issues with your code because then it will always be true, and it will do some weird things. So just be careful on that one when you're debugging. Another thing we can do is we can check in one instance if something is equal to something else with the two equals. We can also check if it's not equal to something else using the exclamation mark and the equals. So with this, we've got the first statement here, which says if value 1 is equal to value 2, then this section we run. If those values were the same, but we change the expression, so if value 1 is not equal to value 2, then if they are the same, then this section will not be run, if that makes sense. So if value 1 is equal to value 2, then this will come out as true, and this will run. If value 1 is not equal to value 2, which if they are the same, this will not be the case, and this won't be run. I feel like I'm not explaining myself very well. Let's have an example. So if value 1 was 1 and value 2 was 2, this would be false, and this would not run. And in this case, this would run because 1 is not equal to 2. So that will evaluate as true. Now, if these were both the same number, say 5 and 5, this section would run, but this section would not, because 5 is equal to 5, and this is asking if it's not equal to 5. So that not thing trips you up when you're trying to explain it, but hopefully it's intuitive enough for you to understand there. We can also use, and you will use this a lot, the greater than symbol. So this simply checks if the number on the left is larger than the number on the right. We can use the less than symbol to check if the value on the left is smaller than the value on the right, and it will return false if they are exactly the same. So if two numbers are exactly the same, say 5 and 5, you're comparing, is 5 greater than 5, then that will return false because 5 is not greater than 5, it's the same as. You'll see a bit more about that in a second. So an example here, we've got if 10 is greater than 9, then this is true, and this section of code will be run. So the number on the left we're looking at. If we have this statement here, 9 is greater than 9, the first one will not be run because 9 is not greater than 9, it's the same as, and instead the second section in the else will be run instead. One way to remember greater than and less than, you've got the little crocodile mouth. If you've never seen this before, crocodile's mouth, larger on the larger side, what you want to be larger, and smaller on the smaller side, what you want to be smaller. So in this case, we're checking if this 9 is larger with the open mouth than this side with a smaller mouth. We can also check if something is greater than or equal to by adding an equal sign to our greater than expression. And we can check if something is less than or equal to by adding an equal sign to our less than expression. So this is exactly the same as what we had before, but it will return true if they are the same. So again, here an example, is 1 greater than or equal to 0? That's true, so the script in between these curly brackets will run. And here we have an if statement, is 0 greater than or equal to 0? Well, 0 is equal to 0, so this again will be true, so this script will run. So there's a slight difference between greater than and adding the equal sign to get greater than or equal to. One thing you can also do is you can combine expressions using the following symbols. You can use a double ampersand here, and this means and. So if you have two expressions, both of them have to be true for the whole expression to also be true. You can use or, which is these two vertical lines, which you might have a tricky time finding on your keyboard for the first time because they're rarely used. But two of those means or. So we might have two expressions, and if either of those is true, then the whole expression will be true. So an example here, if 1 is greater than 0 and, so we have this double ampersand here, ABC is equal to ABC, both of these statements here are true. So this expression will evaluate as true and the script between the curly brackets will run. However, if we look at this, we've got this side will evaluate as true, this side will evaluate as false, and because they both need to be true with the and symbol, it will come out as false, so this won't run, and the section between the else, because it's false, will run. Looking at the or operator, again, we have is 1 greater than 0, that's true. And we have is ABC equal to DEF. Well, that's false, but because this section is true, and with an or, only one of these sides needs to be true in order for the whole expression to evaluate as true. So that means the curly bracket section, the script in here, will be run because the whole thing will come out as true because of this or symbol in between. So there's a lot of theory we've just covered in there, and that might be a bit overwhelming. So what we'll do is we'll go into the meta editor and we will have a look at using these if and else statements to make our expert advisor more useful. Okay, so we're back in our MetaTrader platform and we are looking at the EURUSD currently, and we have our expert advisor from the last lesson, which is telling us the current spread and also the point size, which we added in the last lesson. But that's not that useful to us. There's no real logic in that. It's just to give us a calculation to give us the spread as a number on the current symbol. So we'll click the IDE, we'll open up the meta editor, and we'll carry on from the last one. But instead of just editing directly in here, we're going to create a new file. We're going to click Save As and create a copy. We'll change that to lesson 5 so that we've got a progress from the last one. We don't lose any changes if we make mistakes in this one. So what we had in this one, we had the onTick function, which is run every time a new price tick comes in, and we calculate the spread using the bid and the ask, and we put that on the screen using the comment function, and we created our own function which does the simple calculation here to work out the spread, and also put it into an integer rather than a decimal place because it's a bit easier to read. We return that, and then that finds its way back out through this calculate spread function here. So when this function runs, what actually happens is, if you can imagine, when this function runs, what the computer sees is the result of that function, which is in this return statement here. So you can imagine where that spread is, that ends up in this statement once that's evaluated. So then we get spread, and we put that into this variable here. And okay, so for this lesson, we're going to make we're going to make a trade helper, and the trade helper is going to help us know when to trade and know when not to trade. So one thing you may want to do when you're trading is you may want to not trade when the spread gets really wide, because that significantly increases the cost of your trading. So it's important to keep an eye out for spread, and so we can make a helper EA that's going to warn us if that is the case. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an input variable, which we covered in a couple of lessons ago, and we're going to create a double for that so we can have a decimal place, and we're going to call this max spread, because what we want to say is the maximum spread I want to trade in our environment is 5, but we also want to change that, which is why we've made it an input. So when we look at the properties of the expert advisor, we can click this input and we can change that to any value that we want. Maybe we move the EA onto a different symbol with higher spreads or lower spreads, and we want to change that to fine tune our expert advisor. So we're going to come back down to where we had our on tick expression. We've got our max spread, so now we want to do something with that. So we have our current spread, and that uses our calculate spread function, which is nice. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable called spread message, and we're going to set this up as a blank one to begin with. So it's got nothing in it. This is just a blank string, and we also need to give the type of that at the start as well for that to work. So we've got a blank message here called spread message, which we can then change that spread message to put into the comments here. So what we'll do then is we'll create an if statement. So we'll comment here, we're going to change the message in the window depending on the size of the spread. So we're just going to comment here to explain to ourselves in the future, but also to help us plan out what we're going to make this if statement do. So to make an if statement, we're going to type if, which is nice and simple. We're going to open the brackets, and we need to know, is our current spread, which we've calculated here, is it greater than our max spread? So what we want to know is our current spread here that we're currently seeing as the difference between the bid and the ask, is it above the value, the maximum value that we've set using our input parameters? Now, if that is true, we open up some curly brackets and we want to do something if it is true. So if this is true, we're going to change our spread message and we're going to say alert, the spread is greater than the maximum allowable spread. We'll put a colon there, and we will leave a space like that. So then we're going to inject our spread into the comment. So we'll put a semicolon at the end of that, as you have to do. And then we also have an opportunity to use an else statement. So we can write else here. So this will happen when the current spread is less than the max spread, because this will come out as false. So this section here will not run. Instead, this section in this curly bracket will run. So we can change our spread message. We can set our spread message to something else. We can say the current spread is exactly what we had before, and we will leave it at that. So we've got two different messages depending on how big the spread is. So we need to use this in our comment section, in our comment function, sorry. So instead of this current spread, we can take this out now and we can put in our variable for spread message. And then we can use that to, we can then inject our current spread calculation in as well. We can put a new line and we can leave the point size there. We could also take that out because I don't think that we need that for this lesson. So we'll just take that out. So now we should have a spread message and a double to string, which works that out. So let's have a save. Let's compile that. Do we get any errors? We've got no errors, which is beautiful. And we will go to MetaTrader and see how that works. Now, obviously, we made this into a new lesson. So what we need to do is we will go remove the old one and we'll drop in our new expert advisor. Now you can see here we've got a new tab because we've added an input and we've got a max spread value of 5. So we can put that down here and you can see that the spread is currently 4. So that's fine. And if the spread ticks above 5, the message will change. Now it's 4, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to our expert list here, right click, click expert list. We'll go over to the properties and we'll just drop our max spread value to 2 because that will give us, is really low, so we'll get our message here. So you can see alert, the spread is greater than the maximum allowable spread, and then it shows you the spread there. Equally, if we were being a bit more lenient, we could come into our inputs, change that to 10, and you can see that we now have the more friendly message, which just tells you the current spread. So now you can change the input on your expert advisor, and you can use that to get a different message to tell you whether you should be trading or not. So say you're a manual trader, you want a quick check of that, you can set that to your maximum tolerance for spread, and you can use this message here to know whether it's a good time to trade or not. So what should you do next? Well, I really recommend that you copy from scratch the EA that we've written here, because it's very good watching videos, but you will not really absorb the information if you don't do this in practice. When you write the EA yourself, you'll come across the common problems like missing brackets, missing semicolons, using the wrong operators in your expressions. You'll do all these things when you do it, even though you're copying from scratch. So what I highly recommend is use this video, open up MetaEditor and create this helper EA. I know it's not that useful. I know it's not going to make you rich, but it's really good for you developing your skills and your confidence in writing in MQL5. If you can't get your EA to work, head over to toolkitfortraders.com and download the code for this lesson and use that and to compare it to see where you might have made any mistakes. So in the next video, we're going to cover something new that we didn't cover in the MQL4 series, and that's object orientation. MQL5 is an object-orientated language, and we'll look at that and what that means and why it's different from MQL4. And key to that is we'll be looking at classes and how they work, what they are, and how we can use them. So this is a new lesson. If you followed the MQL4 series, this one is one definitely to watch because classes are something that's new to MQL5, and it's something that's pretty common in major programming languages like JavaScript, Python, C#, C++, are all object orientated and can use classes. So if you learn classes in the next video, you'll be able to use them in any programming language you use, not just this one. So that's all we have for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks and goodbye.